After 10 years, my wife suggested an open marriage. I filed for divorce the next day. Not because I'm the kind of person who slams doors and makes grand exits. I'm the kind of person who reads the fine print. And on the morning after that conversation, while Diane was still asleep, I picked up the shared tablet from the kitchen counter to check the weather and saw a hotel loyalty app notification I didn't recognize. One night, a city 3 hours away. 14,000 points added to an account in her name. I had never stayed at that hotel. I had never created that account. I set the tablet down, finished my coffee, and called an attorney when the office opened at 8. That was a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I had signed the initial petition. Looking back, the thing that surprises me most is how calm I was. Not numb, not in shock, not running on adrenaline, just calm. The kind of calm that arrives when your body finally catches up to something your brain has been quietly processing for months. It felt less like a decision and more like a conclusion. Let me back up to the Wednesday night. Diane and I had been together for 12 years, married for 10. No kids, though, not for lack of trying. We went through 2 rounds of fertility treatment in year 7 and year 8, both unsuccessful. That period was hard in ways I still don't have clean language for. I paid for all of it. I also restructured my workload during those 18 months to be more present, turned down a project manager role that would have required extensive travel, and tried to treat her grief as more important than mine, which probably wasn't healthy, but it was what I knew how to do. After the second round didn't work, something in the marriage shifted. Not dramatically, just a slow, almost imperceptible reorientation, like watching a painting and gradually realizing something in the background has changed. On Wednesday evening, I came home to find dinner already on the table, which was unusual. Diane cooked when she wanted to set a particular tone. Renata, her closest friend, was sitting at our kitchen island with a glass of wine, which was less unusual but still registered somewhere in the back of my mind. Renata's coat was on the back of a chair in that settled way, as though she had been there for a while rather than just stopping by. The shared tablet was on the counter, charging, face up, which was its usual spot. I didn't look at it. Renata left almost immediately after I arrived. She touched Diane's arm on her way out, a small gesture that I cataloged and did not analyze until later. I asked Diane if everything was okay. She said yes and smiled in the specific way people smile when they have decided what they are about to say is going to go well for them. We ate. She talked about a design project, a client she found frustrating. I talked about work, a deadline that had moved. Normal Wednesday. Then she cleared the plates, sat back down, folded her hands on the table, and said she'd been doing a lot of work on herself. That phrase. I've thought about it 100 times since. It never announces anything good. She talked for about 6 minutes without interruption. Ethical non-monogamy, relationship evolution, authenticity. She used the word expansive twice. She said something about not wanting to be someone who holds me back either, which I found interesting since the sentence was nominally about my freedom, but was clearly about hers. She said this could be beautiful for both of us. I waited until she finished. Then I asked, "Is there someone specific?" She said no. I said, "How long have you been thinking about this?" She said, "A while, 6 months or so." "Did you talk to anyone about it before me?" "I've been processing it." She didn't answer the question. I noticed that. I asked it again differently. "Did you talk to Renata about this?" And she said that Renata had been supportive during her process of self-exploration, which was a yes delivered through a considerable amount of additional language. I said I needed to think. She said that was healthy. She seemed genuinely relieved, as though the conversation had gone exactly the way she planned. She went to bed. I told her I'd be up soon. I sat in the kitchen for probably 40 minutes. At some point, I picked up the tablet to check my work email, out of habit more than anything. The hotel app notification was on the lock screen. I didn't recognize the app. I opened it. The account was registered under her email address. 4 stays over the previous 7 months. The most recent had been 6 days ago. One night. A city I associated with nothing in particular. No family there. No conference I remembered her attending. Nothing. I went back and counted the dates. 7 months. She had told me 6 months. I sat with that for a while. The overhead light in the kitchen was slightly too bright, the kind of lighting that makes everything look a little clinical. I looked at the tablet and then at the counter and then at the door to the hallway. I could hear her breathing from the bedroom, the kind of breathing that means sleep. I didn't go in. I thought about going in. I imagined the conversation, waking her, holding up the tablet, watching her find the explanation. I've replayed it many times, and I never get past the part where she looks at me, because I know exactly what expression she would have used, and I didn't want to have that fight at midnight when I had nothing in writing and no idea what I was actually dealing with. So I didn't. I made a list instead. On my phone, in the Notes app, because that's what I do when I can't sleep, I make lists, assets, accounts, mortgage contributions. The fertility treatment invoices I still had saved in email because I am the kind of person who saves financial correspondence. Her freelance income had been irregular for the past 2 years. Mine covered the fixed expenses with room left over. The house was in both names, but the mortgage was primarily serviced by my income. I'd run the numbers once before, during a slow afternoon, and it came to roughly 73%. At 7, I called my brother Joel. He picked up on the second ring. "I know it's early," I said. "I'm already up." "What happened?" It wasn't a question. I told him about the conversation and then about the tablet. He was quiet for a moment. "Don't touch anything," he said. "Don't confront her. Call an attorney." Joel is a practical person. It's one of his better qualities. Patricia's office opened at 8. I left a message with as much information as I could give efficiently. She called back before noon. "Come in Friday," she said. "Bring every financial document you can access." I went to work on Thursday. I had a 9 o'clock meeting and a deadline review in the afternoon, and I went to both of them and participated like a person whose marriage was not silently ending in the background. My colleague Owen asked if I was all right around 3 o'clock, and I said I was tired, which was true, and he nodded and didn't push it, which is one of the things I appreciate about Owen. Diane texted me around noon, a link to an article about open relationships. She included a small heart emoji. I read the entire article over lunch. It was well written. I thought about the hotel. When I got home that evening, she was warm, almost deliberately warm, the kind of warmth that belongs to someone who has been waiting for a long conversation to be over. She made pasta. We watched something on television. She fell asleep on the sofa, and I watched the last 20 minutes of whatever it was without retaining any of it. Friday morning, I got to Patricia's office at 9. I brought the financial records, the mortgage statements, the fertility treatment invoices, and my phone with the hotel notification, photographed from 3 different angles. Patricia reviewed everything methodically, without expression, the way you'd expect from someone whose entire professional life involves reviewing documents from people in exactly this kind of situation. She asked who had set up the hotel loyalty account. I said Diane, as far as I could tell. She asked if Diane knew I had access to it through the shared tablet login. "Probably not," I said. "She's not particularly careful about that kind of thing." Patricia made a note. Then she explained, in terms that did not require any legal background to understand, that a shared Apple ID creates shared data across connected apps, that accessing notifications on a shared device was not unauthorized access, and that the information could be relevant to several aspects of the proceedings. "What aspects?" I said. "Her characterization of the marriage and its condition," Patricia said, "and the timeline." I signed the initial petition on Friday afternoon. I told Diane that evening. She stared at me for a long time across the kitchen, standing in roughly the same spot she'd been standing when Renata left on Wednesday. Then she said my name, slowly, the way you say something you're not sure you heard correctly. "You're not serious," she said. "I am," I said. She asked me to talk about it. I said we'd be talking through our attorneys. She said I was being irrational, that I hadn't even given it a real chance, that she had tried to be honest with me. I thought about the hotel. I thought about the 7 months versus the 6 months. I thought about the article with the heart emoji. "Okay," I said, and went to get my coat. I had told Joel I would be at his place for dinner, and I was. The first week at Joel's, I slept on a pull-out sofa that was slightly too short for me, and woke up every morning at 5:30 for no particular reason. Joel lived 20 minutes from the house. Close enough to feel strange, far enough that I didn't drive past it accidentally. He left coffee on the counter before he left for work and didn't ask how I was sleeping, which I appreciated. Patricia's office became a regular stop. On the second Friday, she walked me through the discovery process in plain language, what we could request, what was already accessible through shared accounts, and what the fitness tracker might contain. The fitness tracker. 2 years earlier, during the second round of fertility treatment, Diane had started wearing one. She was tracking sleep, stress, everything. At some point, she had shared her account with me through the app, her idea, not mine, because she wanted me to see the data, to understand what her body was going through. We had shared access for about 3 weeks before it stopped coming up in conversation, and I forgot entirely that I had it. I never removed myself from the account. Apparently, she forgot she'd added me. Patricia said carefully, "Don't access anything through that account before we discuss it, but tell me everything the app shows on your end." I opened it that night at Joel's kitchen table while he made dinner and read me sports results I hadn't asked for. The location history was enabled. It went back 18 months. There was an address that appeared repeatedly, not a hotel, not a conference center, a residential building in a neighborhood about 40 minutes from our house. The first visit was time-stamped 8 months and 11 days before the Wednesday night conversation. Not 6 months, 8 months and 11 days. She had given me 6 months, twice. I wrote the address down on a physical piece of paper because I'm the kind of person who doesn't entirely trust cloud storage when things matter, and I texted Patricia the screenshot. Her reply came back in under 2 minutes. "Good, don't access the account again. I'll handle it from here." I put my phone face down on the table. Joel set a bowl of pasta in front of me and sat down and said, without looking up, "How bad is it?" "It's bad," I said. "Okay," he said, and started eating, and that was the entirety of that conversation, which was exactly what I needed. I went back to the house the following Saturday to collect more of my things. Diane was there, which I had expected. She had clearly been thinking carefully about what she wanted to say and had arrived at something she believed was reasonable. She told me she understood I was hurt. She said she had perhaps not introduced the idea in the most considered way. She used the word framework in reference to what our relationship might become. I put books in a bag. She followed me from room to room, not aggressively, just present. The way you stay near something you're not ready to relinquish. She said, "I need you to understand that I've been lonely." I said, "When did that start?" She said, "It built slowly, years, honestly." 8 months and 11 days, I did not say. "Okay," I said instead, and kept packing. I found the credit card statement that afternoon, not deliberately. I was pulling old paperwork from the filing cabinet in the office for Patricia's document request, and it was there in the folder, labeled, with some optimism, "Miscellaneous Business." It was a joint card I rarely used, one we'd set up years ago for household emergencies and then largely forgotten. The charges were small enough individually to miss. A restaurant I didn't recognize, parking in an unfamiliar neighborhood, a coffee shop appearing with low-grade regularity every Thursday morning, 3 hotel charges. The earliest one was from 8 months and 2 weeks before that Wednesday. I sat on the floor of the office with the statement in my hand for probably 3 minutes. Then I photographed every page and sent it to Patricia and put the original in the box I was taking to Joel's. Owen texted that evening to check in. I told him the broad strokes, keeping it factual. He was quiet for a moment and then wrote, "For what it's worth, she seemed different to me at your dinner party, the one in March, last year. Last March was 8 months before the Wednesday conversation. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my business," he wrote, "but I noticed." I said, "What kind of different?" "Distracted," he wrote, "somewhere else." I filed his message away and went to sleep on the pull-out sofa. The following week, Renata texted me. She said she really hoped I was giving this a genuine chance, that Diane was being brave, that change was hard for people who preferred stability. I read it twice. Then I found a text she'd sent me 3 weeks before the Wednesday conversation, back when I hadn't known there was a Wednesday conversation coming. A text I'd read as vague, friendly concern at the time. "She's going through something. Just be patient with her." 3 weeks before. I screenshotted both messages and sent them to Patricia with a brief note explaining the dates. Patricia's response, "Perfect." Meanwhile, Diane had not been idle. I heard this indirectly through the small ecosystem of mutual friends that exists in any long marriage. Someone asked Owen whether I was doing okay with everything, in a tone that suggested they already had context for what everything was. A couple we'd known for 6 years posted a series of articles about emotional availability and relationship growth that week, which could have been coincidental. Diane's college friend sent me a message that said she was sorry things were hard and that she hoped I could find peace. The message was compassionate. It was also based on a version of events I didn't recognize. I didn't respond to any of it. I had a specific conversation with myself about this. In the car on the way to work one morning, the internal kind where you have to argue with yourself out loud to take it seriously. The version of me that wanted to correct the record lost to the version that recognized correcting the record publicly would provide Diane's narrative with exactly the energy it needed. So I said nothing and let it run. What I did instead, I called my firm's HR department and let them know, factually and briefly, that I was going through a divorce in case there were any administrative items related to shared benefits that needed updating. The HR coordinator thanked me and noted it. This was not a strategic move, it was administrative, but it meant there was a date-stamped record of me behaving professionally and transparently at work, which Patricia later described as useful. Diane initiated mediation 4 weeks after I filed. Her attorney's letter described the marriage as having experienced significant deterioration over multiple years due to emotional disconnection, and listed the house as her primary concern, noting her substantial domestic and emotional contributions to the household. She was requesting a larger share of the equity on that basis. I sent Patricia the fertility treatment invoices and the 3 years of mortgage statements the same afternoon. Then came Sandra. Diane's mother called me on a Sunday evening. I almost didn't pick up. We had a reasonable relationship, Sandra and I, built on mutual politeness and a shared understanding that I was reasonably good for her daughter, and she was reasonably happy about that. But I picked up. She said she knew this was hard. She said she hoped there was still a chance. She told me you've been distant for years, Marcus. For years. And then she caught herself. John, I'm sorry, John. I said, I know she did. Sandra said, is it true? I said, I don't think it is. A pause. She says you were never really present after the treatments failed. I thought about the project manager role I'd turned down, the travel I'd canceled, the 18 months of restructured work and redirected grief. Sandra, I said, I paid for both rounds of treatment out of my personal savings. I restructured my entire schedule to be available. That's on record. Another pause, longer. I didn't know that, she said quietly. I know, I said. We didn't have much to say after that. She told me she was sorry things had gotten to this point. I told her I was too, and meant it. We hung up. That night I found something I hadn't been looking for. I was returning the tablet to its charging spot. Diane had left it at the house. She'd taken her laptop but forgotten the tablet, which she used mainly for design work. And I noticed the iCloud backup was enabled on the shared account, the same one tied to her email. Photos and messages backed up automatically. The backup showed her phone data up to about 6 weeks prior. I put the tablet down. I called Patricia. Don't open anything, she said before I finished the sentence. I wasn't going to. Good. Does she know you still have the tablet? I don't think she's thought about it. Leave it exactly where it is, Patricia said. I'll file for device discovery Monday morning. I went to bed. I lay in the dark in Joel's spare room, listening to the neighborhood outside, and thought about how the same object that had shown me the hotel notification was now sitting on the kitchen counter of my house, containing, very possibly, 7 months of messages I hadn't been meant to see. There was something almost architectural about it, the way the same foundation keeps appearing in different rooms. The mediation session was scheduled for the following Thursday. I pressed my palm flat on the mattress. The pull-out bar pressed back. I thought, 4 days. The mediation room was aggressively neutral. Beige walls, a rectangular table, a window that looked onto a parking structure. Diane arrived with her attorney 7 minutes after we did, which I suspected was deliberate. She was dressed carefully, professional without being severe, and she sat down across from me and arranged her hands on the table in a way that communicated composure. She had prepared for this room. She'd had weeks. Her attorney opened with a summary of her position. A marriage of 10 years, sustained deterioration, attributable to emotional withdrawal on my part. Diane having sought human connection in response to prolonged loneliness. Her substantial contributions to the household's domestic and emotional functioning, and her request for a larger portion of the home equity reflecting those contributions. I watched Diane while her attorney spoke. She watched the table. Patricia said very little. She had told me beforehand that this session was mostly for observation. Let her build the structure, Patricia said. We'll need to know what it looks like before we take it apart. The mediation did not produce an agreement. Patricia introduced our financial documentation at the end of the session, briefly, without commentary. 3 years of mortgage statements, the contribution ratio, the treatment invoices. Diane's attorney asked for time to review. The session ended with a follow-up scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the parking structure afterward, Patricia said, "The device discovery came through this morning. We have access to the backup." I stopped walking. "And?" "The messages go back 9 months," she said. "The relationship began as a client engagement, design work, legitimately. The personal component started around the 8-month mark before your Wednesday conversation." She paused. "She told him, in writing, that she planned to propose an open arrangement to you. The message is dated 3 weeks before that Wednesday." 3 weeks, the same window as Renata's text. "Just be patient with her." "So Renata knew," I said. "Renata knew," Patricia confirmed. I stood in the parking structure and looked at a concrete pillar for a moment. "What else?" "She refers to the house in several messages as something she expects to keep. She describes you, in her words, as financially reliable but emotionally checked out." Patricia's tone remained professionally level. "Those messages will be interesting in the context of her deposition." Diane's deposition was scheduled for the following week. I was not in the room, but Patricia gave me a precise account afterward. Seated in her office with a cup of coffee she didn't drink, Patricia had asked Diane to describe the timeline of the marriage's deterioration. Diane said the emotional drift had begun 2, perhaps 3 years ago. She said she had begun exploring other possibilities approximately 6 months before she approached me with the idea of opening the relationship. Patricia placed 3 documents on the table. The first was the credit card statement showing charges at a specific address beginning 8 months and 2 weeks before our Wednesday conversation. The second was a printout of the fitness tracker location history, subpoenaed through the device discovery order, mapping repeated visits to a residential address beginning 8 months and 11 days before Wednesday. The third was a screenshot from the message backup, time-stamped 3 weeks before Wednesday, in which Diane described her plan to raise the open marriage conversation with me. Patricia asked Diane to explain the discrepancy between her stated 6-month timeline and the documented 8-month timeline. Diane's attorney called for a 10-minute break. After the break, Diane said she may have conflated some timelines. That memory was imperfect, that she hadn't been tracking dates. Patricia said, "When you told the mediator that the marriage deteriorated due to emotional withdrawal on your husband's part over multiple years, were you aware that the timeline you've now revised would show an overlapping period with an undisclosed relationship?" Diane did not answer directly. She said the two things weren't related. Patricia said, "You've described your husband as emotionally checked out. I'd like to ask about the period of fertility treatment in years 7 and 8 of the marriage. Did your husband modify his professional schedule during that time to be more available to you?" A pause. "Yes." "Did he decline a career opportunity during that period to prioritize your treatment process?" "He turned down a project, a senior management position," Patricia said, "with significant travel requirements. Did his income cover the cost of both treatment rounds?" Silence. "Did it?" Patricia said again. "Yes," Diane said. "And you've described him as emotionally unavailable for several years. Would the treatment period fall within those several years?" No answer. Patricia moved on. She asked whether Diane had discussed the open marriage proposal with anyone before raising it with me. Diane said she had processed it with a friend. "Was that friend Renata?" "Yes." "When did those conversations with Renata begin?" A pause. "I'm not sure exactly." Patricia produced the message backup screenshot. "Does this message, sent to Renata 4 weeks before your conversation with your husband, refresh your recollection?" Diane looked at it for a long moment. Her attorney leaned over. They conferred quietly. Then, Renata's deposition. Patricia described it in fewer words. She asked Renata whether she had been aware, prior to the Wednesday conversation, that Diane was in a relationship with someone else. Renata said she knew Diane was struggling. Patricia asked whether she knew Diane was involved with another person specifically. A pause. "I knew she cared about someone." "Did John know?" The pause this time was longer. "Not from me," Renata said. That was all Patricia needed. Not a confession, not a dramatic reversal. Just a refusal to say no, when no was not the true answer. Renata didn't betray her friend. She simply declined to complete the lie, and the absence of that one syllable was enough to collapse the frame Diane had been carefully building. The second mediation session lasted 40 minutes. Diane's attorney arrived without the composure of the first session. The domestic contribution argument had lost its foundation. The financial records made the contribution ratio concrete, and Diane's own deposition answer about the fertility treatment period directly contradicted the years-long emotional unavailability claim. You cannot simultaneously testify that your husband was checked out for years and confirm that he restructured his career and covered tens of thousands of dollars in medical costs during the same period. One of those things erases the other. The equity was divided according to documented financial contribution. Not punitive, not generous. Accurate. Diane kept her portion. I kept the house. No ongoing support. Her freelance income was established, and her professional network was current and functional. Patricia handled it all with the same unhurried, methodical energy she had brought to every meeting, and when it was done, she shook my hand and said, "You did this correctly." I said, "I had a good attorney." She said, "You had documents." Afterward, in the hallway outside the settlement room, Diane asked if she could speak with me for a moment. Her attorney was still inside gathering papers. I stopped. She said, "I didn't plan for it to go this way." I said, "Which part?" She looked at me. I'd known her face for 12 years, and I recognized the expression she was wearing. Not performance, not strategy, just the actual thing underneath. She said, "I did love you. That was real." I said, "I know," and I meant it. That was the part I hadn't expected to still be true. "I thought you'd fight for it," she said. "For us." I stood in the hallway under fluorescent lighting and thought about the Wednesday night, the table set before I arrived, Renata's coat on the chair, the careful language, the 6 months that were actually 8. "I would have," I said, "a year ago." I walked back into the settlement room. She stayed in the hallway. I don't know for how long. Sandra called 2 weeks later, on a Sunday, same as before. I had half expected it. She'd spoken to Diane's younger sister, not Diane directly, and had learned something closer to the actual timeline. She didn't apologize in those words. She said, "I shouldn't have repeated what she told me. I didn't have the full picture." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "You were good to her." I said, "I tried to be." We didn't have anything else to say. I didn't invite her back into regular contact. She hadn't done me serious harm. She'd believed her daughter, which is what mothers do, and I didn't carry it against her. She simply wasn't my responsibility anymore, and I think she understood that. The mutual friends I didn't address. Diane's version of the story was already out there in the soft, distributed way those things exist, present in assumptions, in the careful way certain people asked how I was doing, in the articles that had been posted during those first few weeks. I didn't issue a correction. The 2 or 3 people who actually mattered already knew the shape of things through direct conversation, and the rest of them would update their understanding eventually, or they wouldn't. And I found I could live with both outcomes. Owen came over about a month after the settlement, ostensibly to help move some furniture. We moved one bookshelf and then sat in the kitchen and drank beer, and he said, "She really thought you wouldn't file." "Yeah," I said. She said as much at that dinner party, when she thought I wasn't nearby. He took a drink. "She said you were too conflict-averse to actually do anything." I thought about Patricia's office on that Friday morning, the financial documents in a neat stack, the pen that signed the petition. She wasn't completely wrong, I said, up until she was. He laughed. I laughed too. It felt strange, and then it didn't. The house was too quiet for the first few weeks. I relearned the sounds of it, the refrigerator cycling, the particular creak of the hallway floor at night, the way light came through the kitchen window at 7 in the morning and fell across the counter in a long, flat rectangle. I repainted the bedroom a different color on a Saturday in November, alone, with music playing that Diane had always found irritating. I left the coffee going too long and had to make a second pot. Normal things. Ordinary things that were mine now in a different way than they had been before. One morning I was making coffee and noticed the empty rectangle on the counter where the shared tablet used to sit. Diane had taken it when she cleared out her things. It had been hers originally. I'd never had much use for it, just used it occasionally when it was there. I'd bought my own a few weeks prior. It was sitting on the counter now, different shape, different color, logged into nothing but my own accounts. No shared Apple ID, no synced apps, no loyalty programs belonging to someone else. I picked it up and checked the weather, clear, turning colder by afternoon. I finished my coffee. I had a 9 o'clock meeting and a report due by end of day, and a dinner with Joel on Thursday that he had already texted about twice to confirm, as though I might cancel, as though I had somewhere else to be. I rinsed the mug, I got my coat. The counter was clean and quiet and entirely ordinary, which was, I was finding, exactly enough.